Well, actually, I've been writing about the writing process for a very long time. I'm very interested in how writing works. And this is because for me, writing has never been actually easy. And I really relate to what Thomas Mann, the German novelist, once said. He said famously that writers are those people who find writing difficult. And I can really, really understand what he means. Because writers are people who understand how much weight every word that they use carry, actually, how much their choices matter. I mean, if you say, for example, a woman sashayed into the room, it leaves you with some kind of emotion, some kind of image. Whereas if you say a woman walked into the room, it's really using the word walked only. It's a serviceable word. It doesn't actually create any atmosphere. So there's so many different choices like this to consider, but also for me, and I know for a lot of other writers as well, writing often is bound very tightly with self-worth. So because what for me, at least, what I put on the page is the best of me, what I see is my better sort of part. So when this doesn't work, when this gets rejected, it's crushing. It can be crushing. So I've always been really, really interested in the writing process, and also because I teach. I've been a teacher of writing for, I don't know, that makes me sound very old, but definitely more than 15 years now. And I mentor writers, and a lot of my writers are friends. So I'm kind of swimming in this environment. And I started writing also very early. My first book was actually published when I was only 20. So all this sort of long preamble was to say that around 2012, I started blogging about the writing process. I started first as being a blogger in residence for Writers Victoria, and the post went quite well. So I did it for quite a few years, and then I started blogging on my own website. And I always had this kind of little dream, thinking, oh, maybe one day I can turn my blog into a book. But I was very insecure about it because there's so many books on writing out there. So I didn't do anything about it. And then in 2019, my publisher, Jane Curry from Ventura Press, came to me and said, hey, Lee, why won't you make a book out of your blog? And I was like, wow, the universe, whatever that means, heard me. So I was very excited, so excited about it for about 5 minutes. And then I looked through my blog posts, and I've had a lot of them. I had maybe 50 blog posts by then, and each of them was quite long as well. It's not even the average sort of 500 word post. But what I realized, there was such a mishmash there. So there was just really a very eclectic collection of my musings on what it means to be a writer, some craft stuff, a bit of satire as well, of literary word. But there was no sort of center, nothing to hold it. And again, I was thinking, but what can I do? How can I put my sort of 5 cents to this very rich world of books on writing, which is already out there? And then I thought about why I actually started initially blogging about the writing process. So I was interested in the writing process much before I started blogging, but why did I start blogging when I did? And I remembered that I started blogging just as I was coming out of pretty serious writer's block. My writer's block lasted for about 4 years. And I know that some writers don't believe in writer's block, and I think they just didn't have it. And actually, there's a lot of neuroscience around creativity and creative blockage. There's a lot of research into it. And what researchers are increasingly finding is that the symptoms that blocked artists experience, not just writers, but any type of writers, they're very similar to symptoms of anxiety. And at the time when I was blocked in those 4 years, it's not that I wasn't writing, I wasn't lazy or procrastinating or anything like that. Actually, I think I was writing even more than now, but I wasn't writing good stuff. I wasn't in touch with how my gut worked. And when I thought about it more, I realized that the stuff that was central to my writer's block was really all around this idea of emotional honesty. And when I think about emotional honesty for writers, I think about this in 3 different ways. So I think about how honest are you as a writer, or me, about the word, about how you see the word? Am I honest enough to understand that I have biases, prejudices, all this sort of stuff? Can I really look at the word objectively? And to do this, you need some kind of, like self-knowledge. Not that you can be completely objective, but as objective as possible. The other facet of emotional honesty for me is in terms of self-awareness of what you actually need as a writer. How honest are you with yourself? How reflective you are as a practitioner, knowing what you actually, what kind of things you need to write at your best, how to get through first draft, for example, all that sort of stuff. And the third aspect of the emotional honesty, which possibly is the hardest one, is courage. So let's say you manage to get rid of the biases that you have, somehow to some extent, you took off your blinkers, you look at the world with all its complexities, all its imperfections. How courageous are you as a writer to actually put it on the page, what you observe there. So when I thought about my those 4 years when I was blocked, I really saw that emotional honesty was at the core of it all. I photoshopped a lot of what I was writing about, simplified things. I wrote that my characters were happy, when we know that you can never be just happy. There's always some shadows around as well. And I was not aware of how so much of what I needed at the time to write as well. So just for a very little example, I used to think that I need to write sitting at the desk, because everybody writes like this, but actually I'm much more productive often when I'm on the couch. Funnily enough, I know it sounds very trivial, but it actually makes a difference to me of like whether I'll be writing for 2 hours or 6. And then of course I was also very scared too at the time in those 4 years, because I wanted to write about things that were not necessarily socially sanctioned. Then I was trying to work on what became my first book in English, my memoir, The Dangerous Bride, which was all about my personal life. So to cut it short, when I was all this long story, come back to why I wrote the book. So when after I sort of thought about all this, I just thought, well, why wouldn't I write a book, the kind of book that I needed when I was younger and I was blocked and I was really struggling. But I want to write the kind of book that really takes emotional honesty as a lens to look at the process of writing and at what the craft of writing itself on the page, and also at how to live your life in a way that will be conducive to writing. And that sort of kind of sorted it for me, what is book going to be about. So when I was writing, so I said before, I was sort of writing for my younger self initially. That was the initial impulse. I wanted to tell my younger self, hey, it's okay, but writing is difficult. Don't worry about it. It doesn't mean you can't, make it or write. But now in retrospect, I mean, especially now that the book is out and I get responses from people, I'm so pleased to see that actually it's not just the more emerging writers who read my book, but also established writers. I mean, that really kind of blew me away. I didn't expect it, but I think our hopes, at least, that this book will speak to not just writers, but also deep readers. So I'm married to a very good reader. That's sort of how we connected. We went out, Daryl, my husband, and I went on our first date, and one of the first things we discussed was our shared passion for Paul Auster. And when we moved in together, we actually had to cull a lot of our books because we had so many doubles. So that sort of was one of the signs we were compatible, I think. So again, this is all this long sort of winding thing just to say that I was really pleased that for Dale, my book was not very boring. He kind of read it with a lot of interest. And since the book came out, I've noticed I've had quite a few responses from people who don't write, but they just read and they really love reading, because reading is a really big motive throughout the whole book. I even have at the very end of the book a list of my favorite 100 books, which I kind of recommend, and also a list of writing books, but that's more specific for writers. But really, even though this is a book about writing, I kind of don't see much separation between the reading and the writing lives. And that's why I've got in the book also my 4 golden rules. Now, I had rules. This is just rules for myself. I'm just sharing them. I'm the first one to always say break all the rules. But one of my rules to myself, because it works for me, is to read is to write, to write is to read. And it may sound very self-evident, but to write is to read. But actually, I don't think so. I think writers often, especially younger writers that I teach, they often get inspired by Netflix. by TV series and movies, and although you can learn a lot about narrative from and character from those mediums, I really don't think they can make you a good writer if you mostly resort to them, because filmmakers have things that writers don't have. They have access to sound, to very fine facial expressions, and generally personalities of the actors. They can create striking visual imagery. We don't have all that, but what we do have, which I think is even better, is the access to the internal lives of our characters. And that's why I think reading is so important, because the more you immerse yourself in many different books, the more you actually get this privilege of experiencing of what it's like to be somebody else in depth. And so for me, really, in the Writer-Led Bear, I try to discuss books all throughout. Doesn't matter what I write about, and look at really what works and how. And really, it's my love song for reading as well, which I started reading when I was 4, and I just never stopped. The only last thing I'll say about it is that the only week in my whole life since I was 4 years old when I did not read was when I had my first child. I was so overwhelmed by excitement and joy and miracle that actually I produced something like this. And so late in my life, I was almost 40 when I had my first child. It was two months before my 40th birthday. I was so overwhelmed by this, but for a whole week, I just could not bring myself to read. I just want to look. He was my book. The child was my book. I was just looking at him. But then when I had my second child, the same day I started reading. So yes, I hope it's a book for readers as well. Now, this is amazing question, which if I had 2 or 3 or 4 hours, I would be discussing with you in depth. In fact, when I give public talks about my book, I often get myself into trouble because one of my slides is just photos of writers I love. And often I just spend most of my talking just to this slide. And anyway, but to make it sort of concise, I knew that you'll ask me this question, Nick. So I decided in advance to focus on 2 writers, one dead, one living. So, and for those of you who read for also political reasons, I apologize in advance. They're both men. Too bad, sorry. But this is just the writers I love. And for me personally, I never read by thinking, oh, I have to like make my quota of that sort of writer or this sort of writers. I just don't see reading as that. I don't care who the writer is. I love Elena Ferrante because, or maybe I should throw her in the mix. But I love Elena Ferrante because I don't know who she is. She could have been white 30-year-old male living in the garage of his parents in I don't know, in Texas, who knows. Okay, so the dead writer that I absolutely adore is Chekhov. And the reason I adore him, I mean, there's so much to love about Chekhov, of course. I don't need to explain too much. But what especially stands to me, and why I read and reread his short stories and plays periodically. I started reading him first when I was about 8 or 7, because I used to just read whatever I had around the house. The reason I love him so much is because Chekhov can humanize any character, even the worst character ever. You can really understand why people do things they do. And maybe I'll just, he really sort of, and he has this really famous saying, which I'm paraphrasing, but he said something along the lines, using, of course, medical metaphors, being a doctor. He said something like, a writer is a person for whom, like for a chemist, nothing is unclean. So I might just, rather than talk about him more in generalities and abstract ways, I'll just give you one example of one short story of Chekhov that really brings it home for me what Chekhov means to me. So he has this really, I'll just flag it's a distressing story. So he has this short story called Sleep, and it's about a teenage peasant girl. I think she's about 13. She's very poor, and a richer peasant family takes her in to be a 92-day baby, but the baby never sleeps. So the baby cries and cries and cries, and all the girl wants to do is just to sleep. She's absolutely, completely exhausted, and she has no help. Nobody ever relieves her of the baby. By the end of the story, she kills the baby because she wants to sleep. And although Chekhov does not justify what she does. And although we are devastated by the ending, we could just see the whole big system that brings this little girl to do what she does. And I think that just talks for itself, what Chekhov is as a writer. And another, and a living writer, okay, I'll mention the woman too. So Elena Ferrante and Karl of Knausgård. So for those of you, I'm sure everybody knows who Elena Ferrante is. And for those of you who don't know who Karl of Knausgård is, oh my God, you just have to run and get his books. He's a Norwegian writer. Both Elena Ferrante and Knausgård, I often think about them at the same time because they both kind of emerged for me, and I think emerged into the worldwide fame at a very similar time. I learned about both of them by reading one of my favorite literary critics, James Wood. He's from New Yorker, so he sort of raved about them, and I bought their books about the same sort of few in a difference, like a few months between the two, and I was totally hooked on both of them. I think they're just direct descendants of Chekhov. They're really channeling him because both of them have this, and again, amazing ability to unflinchingly look at the world and at themselves, I think, because they're pretty much, I mean, with Knausgård, it's clear that he's an autobiographical writer. He's most known for his magnum, how do you say that? Magnum anyway, his big epic, I forgot how you say it, but his big epic sort of memoir, which he, for legal reasons, called novel, but it's not novel, called My Struggle. And the reference to Hitler is not incidental, as it's not accidental, it's a very self-aware reference. And let me tell you, he's not a fan of Hitler. Of course, but in his sixth volume, the sixth book in this sixth sort of volume series, he folded into his memoir is a 600-page essay about Hitler, which I think is really amazing analysis of Nazi Germany and younger Hitler and how all these things happened. But putting this aside, the reason I adore so much Knausgård and Ferrante is because, once again, they show us the world not as they would like it to be, but they show it as it is. And it's not pretty, and that's okay, because the world is not pretty. And they're not trying to strive for happy endings, for justifications. They really show us the human condition, but they also show, of course, the good as well. So you're not just left just sort of feeling your own way in the darkness, but both of them are profoundly courageous as well, I think, in the way they discuss anything. And I really love both of them talk in the interviews about how, even though a lot of ideologies and thinkers and politics dear to them, they kind of put them aside when they write. So especially, I'm paraphrasing Ferrante, but Elena Ferrante, one of the most profound things that she said for me was, she talked about how feminism really shaped her in her youth. If I'm not mistaken, if she is a real person, she says I think she was young through the 70s in Italy when, feminism was, of course, extraordinarily important then. But she says, when I write, I'm not trying to write a feminist story. I'm not trying to write a story which will be correct. I'm just trying to tell how people live their lives. And to me, this is the essence of emotionally honest literature. That's another question I can talk about a lot, but as I said before, my book starts with can I just read the first paragraph of my book, because I just think it answers this question really well. I'm sorry, this is not a self-promotional thing, it just genuinely answers this. Every now and then I get a particularly cheerful student in my writing class. While everyone else bemoans the ginormous, as my children are fond of saying, effort that writing requires, this student will sit back, smiling mysteriously, or perhaps incredulously. At some point, they will raise their hand to tell us, not so much smugly as rather innocently, that writing is a sheer joy for them, that whenever they sit at a computer, open a notebook, or nowadays a voice recorder, the words just pour out of them, as if of their own accord. This is the one student, however, I'm sorry to report, who is usually made of the least writerly material, as my once jealous class inevitably discovers when they begin sharing their works. So as I was saying before, and this really ties, to Thomas Mann, of course, who said that writing is difficult. So I find so many things about writing difficult. But one thing that I really hate, absolutely hate, is first drafts of anything. It doesn't, not just a novel or memoir, not just a book long piece. If I sometimes I write just very quick sort of journalistic short pieces, like 600 words or something. I hate those first drafts too. Honestly, whenever I do in a stage of writing the first draft of my book, my house is very clean. It's spotless. I'll do anything. I'll scrub the floor. I'll go to the dentist. I just don't want to write the first draft. And this brings me, and this really, I think, maybe extreme, but it's also quite typical, because from teaching, and Nick, you may relate to this too, because you're a teacher. I find, and also from conversations with my writer friends, I find that writers can be roughly often divided into two camps. I mean, there are always exceptions, but it seems we are divided more or less into two camps. Those who absolutely love writing first drafts, and those who love the revision part, the redrafting. So I'm in the second camp, of course, as you can hear. And I think it's really to do with our personalities and desires. And I have a whole chapter about this, which I call builders and renovators. So builders are the people who love building the story brick by brick, creating scenes, discovering what the story is about. They are very brave people. They can live with uncertainty much better than I can. I'm a control freak. So I'm a renovator. Give me any ruin. It can be the biggest ruin in the world, but a ruin is better than nothing for me. So I need to have something. So when I get from my first draft, that's when my fun begins, because I love, I love the language. I love making meaning of the story. I like to sharpen the scenes and understand what's about. I don't like doing the hard work of the brick by brick by brick kind of thing. So just to sum up this, just what I think is, but there is the good news about it. There is solution. There are ways to get through the stages we particularly dislike, particularly find difficult. And I think it, for me, with first drafts, what works for me, and I think for a lot of writers like me, is to get through the first draft as fast as you can. So not to edit, not to worry about leaving gaps and not having even clear motivations for the characters, but just get it done and then start shaping your work. Okay, so it's a very complex question, but I think is also very urgent, because social media really it's like an earthquake. It's really sort of shook our earth, our spiritual, whatever, internal earth, and really rearranged our internal furnishings. And I see a lot when I teach younger people who, unlike me or unique, grew up in the age of before the social media. I see that their minds often do work just differently. But I mean, there's so many things we can say about social media, and the usual stuff we say is that how it affects our concentration adversely, which of course for writers is not very good. And then of course there's a whole talk of positive impacts that social media creates for writers, which is connects us together and sometimes gives actually opportunities to marginalized voices to get ahead through social media, and that's all good. So there's the good and the bad. So the non-bad is the lack of the problem with concentrations, and the good is those connections with people who sometimes don't have other opportunities create with the industry. But I want to talk about something else, and I want to talk about other things, but I'm not going to be positive. I preface it. I wanted to talk about some risks that social media really poses to emotionally honest writing. So to our process of creating such literature. So I really love a quote by Proust, who of course I would have been very interested if he lived in the age of social media, what he would have to say. But I kind of know what he would say, because what he said in his time was, and I'm paraphrasing, is that really good writing, truthful writing, comes from dark and silent places. Now, one of the things that social media creates, if you use it quite a lot, and a lot of us writers actually have to use it for promotional reasons as well, it creates a very active mind, which, you know, most writers have anyway, but it brings into our mind this can really impact our mind by bringing this chorus of other online voices of people, often strangers, often people who perhaps not even representing themselves for who they are, whatever it is, but we all have all this sort of chorus in our heads, which I think is a big problem when as a writer you're trying to go into this mysterious, dark, silent place, which is conducive to creating emotionally honest and deep work. Deep probably is even more better word here. And this chorus affects us in many different ways. So, for example, I think it's very important for writers to be vigilant when they write, and to, as I was saying before, it's one of my biggest things about emotional honesty, that we have to always question our biases and prejudices. But when you're on the internet, when you're on social media, people get offended at everything. You just do not know. It's literally impossible to create something, to write something which is not going to be offensive. And I'll give you just a quick example. During the lockdowns, when, you know, everybody sort of was buying that mythical toilet paper, I went to Costco with my son, who was 8 then, and we were standing in line waiting for our toilet paper. You know, it was ration, so we had to wait for our one big pile of toilet paper. And I took my son was going like this, standing there very bored. And I took a photo of him next to these empty shelves where there used to be toilet paper. And I made a kind of cute Instagram post saying something like, oh, I use this opportunity of waiting in the queue for toilet paper to educate my son about my Russian childhood, because in the Soviet Union, we always had to queue for everything. Is that an offensive post? I don't think so. So people actually, I had lots of likes for it and lots of funny comments. People made lots of jokes. And then I got this comment saying something like, and look, I don't want to, okay, I'll just tell you what the comment said. So the comment said something like, do you know that for people who, have you considered that people who suffer from anxiety, it may be really distressing to see photos like this? And what the writer of that comment was referring to was the empty shelves, that it creates anxiety. Now, I understand anxiety. I myself sometimes suffer anxiety, but really, you know, the internet space, the online space was full of photos like mine of empty shelves, and you just need to go and do shopping, you see them. So I'm not, you know, I'm not minimizing this, but it's very difficult. It was very difficult in lockdowns for people with anxiety. But what I'm trying, the point, and that's not the point of the story. The point of the story, this post really was not an offensive post by any means. And when you sort of, when you spend a lot, back to our purposes of writing and social media, the question of what happens to writers in the dark and silent spaces, I think what I've noticed with myself and also with some of my peers, and we talk a lot about it, is that the more you spend time in this universe full of strangers, millions of them, with all their own likes and dislikes and concerns and problems, the more you become extra cautious. So not vigilant and cautious, but hyper vigilant and hyper cautious. And that, I think, is unhealthy. I think there is a difference between vigilance and hypervigilance. And what you may end up with, and that happened to me definitely, I became much more cautious and worried and anxious about not offending anybody. But if you write completely toothless book, first of all, it's not real, it's not honest, and nobody's going to read it either. So there's a difference between being worried and you know, in a balanced way about what you're doing, and being just paranoid. And that's what happens to a lot of us writers. Another thing with social media is that it's very, see, what we see and how we interact in social media, what I find, and I mean, there's research about it as well, it really reshapes our brain structure. It really reshapes how we think. how we respond emotionally to things. And when you spend a lot of time in the universe also where everybody is so quick to take offense and voice very strong opinions, especially Twitter kind of thing, but I think it's any social media really, you always also risk to start writing in a more preachy way, making you on point, trying to be moralistic, sounding with self-righteous. So often the negative things of that you encounter in social media, they translate into the writing. Now, there's plenty of good things on social media too. And there were many times when I felt low and I went on social media and somebody said something nice to me about some post, and I kind of made me happy. So I'm not saying everything that is terrible, but what I'm saying is that as writers, we have to be particularly cautious how we use the space and to what extent. And speaking about liking posts and getting sort of cheered up by somebody's comment, the worst thing about the social media, I think, for writers is that it's not even the self-righteousness and the hypervigilance, it's the cuteness of and the triviality of the interactions that we have often online. So I have nothing against cute cats. I like cute cats too. But if you spend every day a couple of hours looking at cute cats, expressing your admiration of cute cats through cute emoticons, and sending love hearts to people you never met because they said something nice to you, and so you want to. It's like this grooming, like when monkeys, they sort of what do they do to each other? I forget, when they look for lies or something, whatever, groom each other. It's this kind of thing that you do a lot in the social media space. You ended up being very cute in your writing. It's really hard not in a bad way. I mean, it's in a negative way. You ended up writing in a very sort of cute, smiley, shiny, sunshiny, sweet kind of populist kind of way. And I don't think that's emotionally honest either. So really to sort of end this discussion, I just want to say that please, writers, protect your dark, silent spaces, and readers as well, not just writers. And I think for me, I mean, I can't not be on social media. That's the sort of problem for writers like me who are literary, which means writers who don't make much money from their writing. It's you do have to be to some extent out there. So what I do usually as I would be more on social media when I promote the book, but when I write my works, when I deep in writing, I really keep it to the very necessary minimum to protect my brain. It's not a perfect solution, but it's the best I so far worked out.